Hi guys, good morning. Happy Tuesday. We are going to be going over homework for today, and hopefully we can help you out a little bit. So at the top of homework, you're going to see four questions, and they're all going to be multiplication and division with decimals. Now, so a couple of these are easier to work than others, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. So I want to focus first on this first problem here and this last problem over here. These are just multiplying decimal numbers together. So we have 43 and 76 hundredths divided by 8. So the first thing we want to do here is we want to take our decimal number here, and we want to make that into a whole number by using multiplication. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the decimal over 2 times, which is the same as multiplying that number by 100. Remember that every time we move that decimal over, we've essentially multiplied that number by 10. So here we've multiplied it by 10 twice, which is the same thing as multiplying by 100. And that's going to give me 4,376 divided by 8. Now, at that point, you're just dividing two whole numbers. And then once you've divided those two whole numbers, your answer is going to be 100 times bigger than it should be. So you just have to make up for that by, in the end, dividing your answer by 100 or moving the decimal back 2 times. Now, when you're doing 4,376 divided by 8, a couple things I want to remind you guys of. Number one, if it's helpful for you, write down your multiples of 8. That seems to be helpful for quite a few people. And secondly, if you need to put your place value markers here, I think that's quite helpful too. Use those strategies that are helpful, and I think that's going to work for you guys on a question like this. All right, now we're going to next go to this last question, which is multiplication, but we're using essentially the same strategy. Now, start off with 2 4/10. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move the decimal over once here to give myself a whole number. That's the same as multiplying that number by 10. Every time you move that decimal over, we're multiplying by 10 because every place value is 10 times bigger than the one before it. And here, we only have to move the decimal over once, so we're going to multiply by 10 as well. And I have 24 times 224. Now, at this point, I'm just going to multiply those two numbers together. Remember that multiplication is commutative, meaning the order doesn't matter. So if you want to put this number on top, you can. That's what I'm going to do. So 224 times 24. Put that down. 224 times 24. I'm going to multiply those two numbers just as I would normally. Now, because I multiplied this first number by 10, and I multiplied this second number by 10, that's 10 times 10. I know that my answer is going to be 100 times bigger than it should be, multiplied by 10 twice. So I'm going to have to divide by 100 in the end, or move the decimal back 2 times. Think about that there. All right. Now, the other two questions here are a little more basic than that. They're just multiplying and dividing by 1,000. And we've already, as we've seen here, decided that it's easy to multiply and divide by tens, hundreds, and thousands. So here, for example, I'm saying 7 25 hundredths times 1,000. Remember, every time we move the decimal over, we've multiplied by 10. So if we move it over once, that's times 10. If we move it over twice, that's like multiplying by 10 twice, or multiplying by 100. If we move it over 3 times, that's like multiplying by 10 3 times, or multiplying by 1,000. So all I really have to do here is move the decimal over 3 times to the right. And down here, I'm going to move it, because I'm dividing by 1,000, 3 times to the left, which is the same as dividing by 10 3 times. Now, the only thing I want to remind you here is that in the number 850, you don't see a decimal to move. Remember, if it's a whole number, it only starts off on the end if it's a whole number. So think about that as you're working that problem. All right. Hopefully that'll help on the computation question. Move on to the next piece here. So the next piece here is a number line, and it's asking us to put numbers on a number line from smallest to biggest. Now, these are all going to be decimal numbers, and again, as we've done in the past, they're all going to be between 0 and 1. They're all going to be between 0 and 1. So what I like to do is just start off by putting down some of these markers that we've talked about. Between 0 and 1 is going to be, you can write 5/10, you can write 50 hundredths, you could write 500 thousandths, would all be a marker of half. In between a half and 0 would be 25 hundredths, and in between a half and 1 would be 75 hundredths. Now, from this point, you kind of have a place to where you can put some of these numbers. So I'm just going to put 3 up here, and we'll talk about them. All right. So we have 51 hundredths, we have 375 thousandths, we have 8 tenths. All three of those numbers. Now, we'll start off with 51 hundredths. Now, when I see 51 hundredths, the first question I'm going to ask myself is that number more than half of a whole, or is that number less than half of a whole? Well, with 51 hundredths, I know that 50 hundredths is half. I wrote that down here. 50 hundredths is half. So 51 hundredths is going to be just a little bit bigger than half. 100th bigger than half. One small piece bigger than half. So I'm just going to take my number line and I'm just going to put it a little bit over half. 51 hundredths. All right. Next, I have 375 thousandths. Now, one thing I'll point out here is if you really look at this first place value beyond the decimal, which is our tenths place, remember that's our largest decimal place value. Remember we said that in order for a number to be half, you would have to have at least 5 tenths. Notice this number does not have 5 tenths, it only has 3 tenths. You can also say that it has 375 thousandths, and it takes 500 thousandths to be half. So we can easily say that that number is smaller than half. Now, if I'm comparing it to this number, remember I can just add a 0 to the end of 25 hundredths, which means it's the same as 250 thousandths, which tells me that this number is going to be somewhere between 25 hundredths and a half. So I'm going to say 375 thousandths. And my last number here is 8 tenths. We know that 5 tenths is half. 8 tenths then is going to be more than half, so it's going to be somewhere on this side of the number line. If I'm trying to compare it to 75 hundredths to see where it would compare there, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a 0 at the end there, and it's 80 hundredths. Tells me it's a little bit bigger than this. Use those strategies, guys. Use that half point as your benchmark number. You say it's either bigger than this or smaller than this. Work from there, and then use these other numbers once you get there, and you can get a really good idea of exactly where it's going to fit on that number line. So I encourage you to do that. All right. Well, let's go to our word problem, and then we'll be finished. All right. So for our word problem, here's what it says. It says, Cole and Finn recently found that there's a major problem in the United States. People don't know what to name their babies. To fix this, they started a business where they name the babies of people for them. For example, they named their first client's baby Frankenfrugal. In the first month, that's not a good name. In the first month, they had 55 customers. So 55 customers in the first week. 55 customers in the first week. They had 27 in the second week. They had 4 in the third week. And they had 1 in the fourth week. I'm seeing a trend there. So 55 in the first week, 27 in the second week, 4 in the third week, 1 in the fourth week. And that's customers. Now, they charge their customers, it costs $21.99 per customer. So we know they had 55 customers the first week, 27 the second week, 4 the third week, 1 the fourth week. And for every customer that they're seeing, they're charging $21.99. Now the question says, well, this is a good one. It says, if their goal is to make $5,000. So this is their goal. We'll write it up here. Goal is $5,000. If their goal is to make $5,000, how much more do they need to make? Now, in order to figure out how much more they need to make, we need to know how much they've already made. So we know this is how many customers they've had, and we know they're charging $21.99 per customer. Now, to figure out how much money they've made in total, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to add together all of their customers. So 55 plus 27 plus 4 plus 1. That's going to tell me how many customers that they've had. Now, once I know how many customers that they've had, I know that for every single one of those customers, they're going to charge $21.99. So I'm going to take whatever this number is, and I'm going to, let's call this number X. I'm going to multiply by $21.99. Now, don't forget when you're doing that multiplication to use the method that we just practiced up top for multiplication of decimals. Now, this would tell me how much money that they've made. It doesn't tell me how much more they need to make to get to 5,000. So think about how we could then find the difference of 5,000 and whatever that number is, and that's going to tell me how much more that they make. So I encourage you to give that a try. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you later in class. Bye.